You've probably heard the jungle swallowed Angkor overnight. One day the greatest city on earth. The next gone, reclaimed by vines and silence. That story is wrong. What actually happened is stranger, slower, and honestly more terrifying because it's happening again right now, in cities you live in. In the next few minutes, you'll learn how the largest pre-industrial city on the planet, bigger than anything in medieval Europe, built itself into a trap it couldn't escape. You'll see how kings, monsoons, and 1,000 miles of hand-dug canals conspired to bring down an empire that once ruled over what's now Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. And you'll find out why modern archaeologists, armed with lasers, just proved almost everyone wrong about how it ended. Here's the number that should stop you cold. At its peak in the 12th and 13th centuries, Greater Angkor sprawled across roughly 1,000 square kilometers. That's bigger than modern-day Los Angeles. Population estimates run as high as 750,000 to 900,000 people, in an era when London had maybe 80,000. But Angkor Wat, the temple you've seen in every travel photo, is just the tip of it. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists thought it was basically alone out there, surrounded by forest. Then, in the 2010s, researchers strapped laser scanning equipment called LiDAR to helicopters and flew over the jungle. What they found underneath the canopy rewrote the textbooks. An entire hidden metropolis, grid streets, ponds, house mounds, temples stretching for miles in every direction. Angkor wasn't a temple complex. It was a sprawling, low-density hydraulic city. And that word, hydraulic, is the key to everything that follows. Cambodia's monsoon climate swings hard. Months of brutal rain, months of near drought. Most civilizations just endure that. The Khmer engineers decided to control it. They built barrages, reservoirs so massive that the largest one, the West Barrage, covers about 16 square kilometers. That's roughly the size of 2,000 football fields, hand-dug, holding water for an entire capital. Around it, they wove a network of canals, moats, embankments, and spillways that could, in theory, capture the monsoon's excess and release it during the dry months, turning an unpredictable climate into a reliable one. This system fed rice paddies that could produce multiple harvests a year. It powered temple construction on a scale that still baffles engineers. It let Angkor grow into an economic and military superpower that dominated Southeast Asia for roughly 5 centuries, from the 800s to the 1400s. But here's the catch: archaeologist Roland Fletcher, who co-directs the Greater Angkor project, has spent decades pointing to the very thing that made Angkor powerful is what made it fragile. A system this big, this interconnected, this permanent, poured in stone and packed earth across 1,000 square kilometers cannot bend. It cannot adapt quickly. Once you've built infrastructure at that scale, you're committed to it, no matter what the sky does next. Fast forward to the 1300s. Scientists at Columbia University, led by paleoclimatologist Brendan Buckley, needed a way to look back at Cambodia's ancient weather. They found it in an unlikely place, a species of long-lived cypress tree in the mountains of southern Vietnam, some individuals carrying nearly 1,000 growth rings. Each ring is basically a diary entry of that year's rainfall. What those rings revealed, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, was chilling. Southeast Asia's monsoon weakened dramatically twice, once in a sustained megadrought from roughly 1362 to 1392, the worst dry stretch the region had seen in 8 centuries, and again in a shorter, even more brutal drought in the early 1400s, hitting a record dry year in 1403, and it gets worse. Sandwiched between those droughts were periods of intense, overwhelming monsoon flooding. Sediment cores pulled from the West Barrage itself show exactly this signature. Centuries of steady buildup, then a sudden decade-spanning disruption right when the tree rings say the rain went haywire. Picture the whiplash. Decades of drought that cracked the reservoirs and starved the rice fields, followed by floods violent enough to blow out canal walls and choke them with silt. A system engineered for predictability got hit with the least predictable stretch of weather in nearly 1,000 years. And a rigid 1,000 square kilometer machine has almost no way to recover from that kind of shock. Now, climate alone doesn't topple an empire, and this is where the real research gets interesting. Because for decades the popular explanation was simpler and bloodier: war. In 1431, forces from the rising kingdom of Ayutthaya, to the west, marched on Angkor and, according to their own chronicles, took the city. Roland Fletcher describes centuries of Khmer court politics as something close to a real life Wars of the Roses. Kings kept multiple wives, which meant tangled succession lines and constant infighting among rival princes. A capital already weakened by decades of climate chaos, with its economy strained and its infrastructure failing, was far easier prey. Add to that a broader shift happening across the region. Trade routes were moving from inland agrarian capitals toward coastal maritime trade hubs. Angkor's whole model, a huge population fed by an enormous inland rice farming machine, was becoming economically obsolete in a world that increasingly ran on sea trade. Here's where 21st century archaeology overturns the old story completely. A 2023 review led by Damian Evans and Roland Fletcher, drawing on 20 years of LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, and excavation data, concluded that Angkor's decline wasn't sudden or violent at all. It was slow, gradual, playing out over roughly 2 centuries. Angkor Wat itself never fell silent. It kept functioning as a religious site, later transitioning into a Buddhist monastery, and monks have maintained a presence there in an unbroken line for centuries. The temples didn't get abandoned in some dramatic single moment. The surrounding population simply drained away, family by family, as the water system that once sustained 750,000 people slowly, irreversibly failed. There was no single day the empire vanished. There was a 200-year unraveling, and the jungle just quietly moved back in behind it. Strip away the temples and the century, and Angkor's story is unervingly familiar. A civilization that engineered a permanent, rigid solution to a variable climate, scaled it to a size nobody could quickly change, and then got blindsided when that climate swung harder than any human record had prepared them for. Modern researchers studying Angkor explicitly draw this comparison to today's climate-stressed megacities, places running on aging, inflexible infrastructure, betting that yesterday's weather patterns will hold for tomorrow. Angkor's engineers were arguably the best hydraulic planners of the medieval world. They still couldn't outbuild a climate that refused to stay predictable. So the next time you see a photo of Angkor Wat's 5 towers rising out of the tree line, remember, that's not a monument to a civilization that vanished in a night. It's a monument to one that built brilliantly, bet everything on the weather staying the same, and lost slowly over 200 years. If you want to see exactly how the empire's water system worked, and where it finally broke, stick around, that's next.